Bobcats are solitary hunters, creatures that typically view house cats as prey, never as companions. So when a stray calico accidentally slipped into the bobcat enclosure at the Maryland Zoo, the staff braced themselves for the worst. Inside, in the territory ruled by a male bobcat named Asher, Protocol collided head-on with compassion. Should they remove the intruder immediately or stand back, take notes, and place their hopes in what seemed impossible? Helen Carter, a veteran wildlife rehabilitation specialist, arrived within minutes, just in time to witness a sight that made her coffee cup slip from her hands and shatter on the concrete floor. In more than 3 decades of working with the wild, she had never seen anything like it. Asher wasn't just tolerating the intruder. He was gently grooming the little cat Mira, sharing his food and shielding her as if the two lives had always belonged together. Why would such an unlikely pair choose each other, and what could possibly happen next? No one was prepared for the answer. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our unexpected stories. The morning mist still hung thick over Baltimore Harbor when Helen Carter arrived at the Maryland Zoo for her early shift. As a veteran wildlife rehabilitation specialist with more than 30 years of experience, Helen had witnessed countless unusual animal behaviors. But nothing could have prepared her for what awaited her on that chilly October morning. The zoo grounds were silent, broken only by the distant calls of waterfowl echoing through the still air. Helen walked along the familiar paths, her weathered hands wrapped tightly around a steaming cup of coffee, her mind already arranging the day's feeding schedules and health checks. Her first stop was always the bobcat enclosure, not because protocol required it, but because Asher, the male bobcat brought here 3 years earlier, had long since become her personal project, a survival story she carried in her heart. Asher's story was one of survival against the odds. He was found as an orphaned kit near the Appalachian foothills after his mother had been struck and killed by a vehicle. At that time, Asher was far too young to survive on his own, and he had grown so accustomed to human presence that release back into the wild was never possible. The decision to give him a permanent home at the zoo had not been made lightly. Wildlife rehabilitation specialists like Helen Carter always aimed for release whenever possible. But Asher's circumstances made that option impossible. He had adapted well to his spacious enclosure, designed to mimic the rocky outcrops and dense vegetation of western Maryland, the very landscapes where bobcats still roamed free. When Helen approached the viewing area, she quickly noticed something unusual. Asher wasn't in his usual morning spot, the elevated platform near the back wall, where he often sat in quiet majesty, surveying his domain with the regal bearing typical of his kind. Instead, he was lying near the feeding station, his tawny coat glistening in the morning light. But Asher was not alone. The coffee cup slipped from Helen's hands, shattering into pieces on the cold concrete floor. There, curled against Asher's warm flank, was a small calico cat. Clearly domestic, clearly out of place, and clearly still alive. The sight before her stood in complete contrast to everything Helen Carter knew about bobcat instincts. Asher was a solitary predator, fiercely territorial, never allowing another feline to intrude. In the wild, a bobcat would regard a house cat as either prey or competition. Even Asher himself in the past had often displayed the typical aggression of his species towards stray cats that ventured too close to his enclosure. Yet here he was, now quietly sharing his space and even his breakfast with an intruder. That cat, small but brave, was Mira. Helen's training kicked in immediately. She gripped her radio tightly, calling for backup while her eyes never left the two animals. She needed to observe carefully every gesture, every movement for any signs of injury or hidden tension. The calico was gaunt, her ribs visible beneath the patchy orange, black and white fur. A notch in her left ear, likely from a long-ago fight, and several matted patches of fur told the story of a hard life on the streets. It was clear she was a stray that had struggled to survive. Yet before everyone's eyes, Mira bore no signs of injury from Asher. No defensive posture, no look of fear. On the contrary, she simply curled up in comfort as if this place had always been hers. Just minutes later, Dr. Alan Reeves, the zoo's head veterinarian, arrived, followed by several other staff members. All of them stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the strange sight. Asher the bobcat, once known for his ferocity, was now gently grooming the little calico's head with his rough tongue. It was a behavior normally seen only between a mother cat and her young, or between bonded pairs in the wild. "How long do you think she's been in there?" Alan whispered, his voice lowered as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment that hung over the enclosure. Helen Carter studied the scene with the practiced eye of an expert. The food dish was empty, but the signs showed it had been shared, not fought over. No scattered bits, no defensive stance, no evidence of conflict. At least since last night's feeding, Helen concluded. Maybe longer. The question now was how to handle it. By protocol, the calico should be removed immediately. There were liability risks, safety concerns, and the fundamental principle that wild animals and domestic animals should never be housed together. But as the morning wore on, and more staff gathered to witness the unprecedented situation, it became clear that any intervention would need to be weighed very carefully. By mid-morning, Victor Hale, the zoo director, arrived, pulled out of a board meeting by urgent messages from his staff. Known for his pragmatism, but also for a deep respect for animal behavior, Victor stood silently watching the unusual pair for a full 20 minutes. His eyes never leaving Asher and Mira before finally speaking. "Tell me about Asher's demeanor," Victor said at last, his voice low and deliberate. "Any signs of stress, aggression, or territorial marking?" Helen Carter shook her head. "None. If anything, he looks even more relaxed than usual. His body language is completely calm. Look at his ears, they're forward, not pinned back. His tail is still not twitching. All of these are signs of a content bobcat." The calico cat Mira, as if sensing the attention, stretched lightly and then strolled over to the water bowl. Asher followed her every movement before joining her. The two animals, one wild, the other a stray, shared the water as naturally as if they had grown up together all along. "We need to document all of this." Victor decided, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. "Set up cameras, monitor them continuously. If there are any signs of aggression, we intervene immediately. But if they truly can coexist peacefully, then that's something priceless to understand." The next 72 hours would be critical. The staff established round-the-clock monitoring, with Helen Carter taking the lead. She patiently observed as the unlikely pair began to develop a routine. The calico, quickly given the name Mira by the team, would sometimes hunt the mice that wandered into the enclosure, a survival skill that Asher watched with what could only be described as amused fascination. In return, Asher shared his daily food rations, sometimes even stepping back to let Mira eat first. The most astonishing moment came on the second evening. A North American raccoon, Russell, had climbed onto the upper mesh of the enclosure, likely drawn by the scent of food. Immediately, Asher shifted into high alert, his wild instincts flaring. He positioned himself between the potential threat and Mira, who was still sleeping peacefully in a corner bathed in the last golden light of the day. Russell quickly retreated, and Asher returned to Mira's side, lying down with a protective posture, one that Helen had only ever seen among bonded pairs of wild bobcats. By the end of the week, the zoo was forced to make a decision. Somehow, the story had leaked out, reaching the local media, likely through a young staff member's social media account. Almost immediately, visitors began buzzing with excitement, eager to ask about the unusual friendship between a bobcat and a stray house cat. But more importantly, separating them at this point seemed potentially cruel. Between Asher and Mira, a strange bond had formed, one that could not be fully explained by science, yet one that no one could deny existed. Dr. Alan Reeves conducted a thorough health examination of Mira, temporarily sedating both animals to ensure absolute safety. The results showed that Mira was about 3 years old and had been spayed, a clear sign that she had once had a home. Though her body was thin, her overall health was stable, and all tests came back negative for diseases that could be transmitted to Asher. After much deliberation, the veterinary team and zoo management made their decision: Mira could stay. But there would be conditions. Asher's enclosure would need modifications. A smaller shelter would be built specifically for Mira, giving her a private space that Asher could not enter should she ever need solitude or recovery time. Additional climbing structures were installed, creating more vertical space for both Asher and Mira. The feeding protocol was also adjusted to ensure they each received balanced nutrition without competition. Helen Carter was assigned to closely monitor this unusual relationship, and what she witnessed challenged many long-held assumptions about interspecies bonding. Asher, though by nature a wild predator, displayed remarkable restraint and even a rare tenderness toward Mira. He frequently groomed her, a behavior bobcats typically reserve only for their own young. In return, Mira seemed to understand Asher's boundaries. She never demanded attention when he showed signs of needing his own space. More than that, the two even began to play together in ways that left the staff astonished. Mira would often initiate mischievous chase games, and Asher would join in, but always with controlled intensity, never unleashing his full strength or speed. Over time, they even developed what seemed to be a private language, a series of chirps and low purrs that carried a meaning known only to the two of them. Helen Carter carefully recorded every detail, realizing she was witnessing a phenomenon that could contribute significantly to a deeper understanding of animal behavior and cognition. As weeks gradually turned into months, the story of Asher and Mira spread far beyond the Maryland Zoo. It became a legend throughout the wildlife rehabilitation community. Researchers from Johns Hopkins University came seeking to analyze this unusual relationship in order to glean new insights into interspecies bonding and communication. Animal behaviorists across the United States also requested access to Helen's meticulous observation logs. Yet perhaps the most profound impact came from the zoo's ordinary visitors. School groups stood silent, eyes wide, watching Asher and Mira bask beside each other in the afternoon Sunday. Elderly couples sat for hours on the nearby benches, finding quiet comfort in that extraordinary friendship as proof that even amid differences that seem impossible to reconcile, a bond can still take root. Helen Carter often overheard visitors comparing the scene to human relationships, saying that differences could be overcome, that kindness sometimes had the power to erase even the most natural of boundaries. One particular moment etched itself into Helen's memory. An elderly veteran named Edward Morris came to visit Asher and Mira every week, always bringing along his granddaughter Sophie Bennett. One day he approached Helen, his eyes glistening with tears. "I served in Vietnam," he said quietly. "I saw things that made me believe the world was nothing but violence, a place where survival belonged only to the strong. But watching these two, I remember that nature still holds gentleness, still holds surprises, and still holds hope." Those words left Helen speechless. For 3 decades devoted to wildlife rehabilitation, she had always placed her trust in science, in protocols, in best practices, and in measurable outcomes. Yet Asher and Mira had taught her something beyond science, that sometimes the most profound moments in nature are the ones that cannot be explained by formulas or research, but only felt with the heart. The scientific community remained divided on how to interpret the unusual relationship. Some experts argued it was simply a matter of mutual benefit. Mira provided companionship that eased Asher's captivity stress, while Asher offered protection and shared resources. Others suggested it might be a form of misplaced parental instinct on Asher's part, though his behavior did not fully align with that theory. Helen Carter had a theory of her own, one she shared only with a few of her closest colleagues. She believed that the intelligence and emotional capacity of animals were far more complex than humans typically acknowledged. Asher had been rescued when he was still very young enough to learn one crucial lesson: not all cats were threats or prey. Mira, on the other hand, after years of harsh life as a stray, had honed survival instincts sharp enough to read Asher's body language with precision and to respond appropriately. As the 1-year anniversary of Mira's arrival approached, the Maryland Zoo organized a small celebration. It was a simple affair. After all, the animals themselves would never understand or care about ceremony. But the event gave the staff and devoted visitors an opportunity to reflect on what this extraordinary pair had taught them. Helen Carter stood before the gathered crowd, her weathered face radiant with genuine emotion. In wildlife rehabilitation, we often measure success by release rates or dry statistics of survival, she said. But Asher and Mira have given us another perspective that success can also mean adaptation. That sanctuary can be found in unexpected places, and that bonds between species as well as between people do not always follow the rules we expect. She paused, her gentle gaze turning toward Asher and Mira stretched out in their familiar patch of warm sunlight, utterly unaware of the fame they had brought. They've shown us that nature still has the power to surprise us, that it can challenge all our assumptions and remind us that gentleness and cooperation are just as much a part of the natural world as competition and predation. A wave of applause erupted. In the crowd, more than a few quietly raised their hands to wipe away tears. Among those present was a young girl named Sophie Bennett, attending with her grandmother, Clara Bennett.
We will.
The girl tugged softly at her grandmother's sleeve and whispered, "Grandma, do you think they really love each other?" The grandmother, a retired biology teacher who had always been skeptical of attributing human emotions to animal behavior, quietly looked toward the pair, resting peacefully in the sun, and smiled softly. "You know, sweetheart, I think they do. Maybe not in the way humans understand love, but in their own way. Yes, they've chosen each other. And sometimes that's what love is. Choosing gentleness when you could just as easily be fierce. Choosing to share when you could take everything for yourself." Time passed, the seasons changed, and Asher and Mira continued their strange companionship. Together they endured Baltimore's humid summers and frigid winters, their bond only seeming to grow stronger with each passing year. Wildlife photographers from National Geographic came to capture their images. Researchers published scientific papers about their extraordinary relationship, and children painted pictures of them covering the walls of the zoo's education center, bright colors speaking in place of words, expressing the admiration and pure affection their story had inspired. But for Helen Carter, the most meaningful moments were not the camera lights or the attention of the press, but the quiet ones. The early mornings when she arrived to find Asher gently grooming Mira. The lazy afternoons when they played together with the enrichment toys she herself had prepared. And the late evening feedings when Asher patiently waited until Mira had eaten her fill before slowly approaching the dish. It was those simple, quiet moments that reminded Helen why she had devoted her entire life to wildlife rehabilitation. Not just to save individual creatures, but to understand them, to learn from them, and to share their stories with a world that had too often forgotten the wonder of nature. In her final observation, log entry for that first year, she wrote, "Asher and Mira have proven that the boundaries humans draw between wild and domestic, between predator and prey, between the possible and the impossible are sometimes softer and more flexible than we imagine. They have shown that kindness exists in nature not as weakness, but as a form of wisdom. In a world so often divided by differences, Asher and Mira remind us that connection can still exist even in circumstances that seem impossible." This story is not just about a bobcat and a stray cat becoming friends. It is about the capacity for gentleness that lies within all living things, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The story of Asher and Mira continued to inspire long after that first magical year. They lived side by side for many more years, their bond never weakening, and then when Mira finally passed away of old age, Asher mourned her in his own way, silent, grieving, as though a piece of his world had shattered. The entire zoo staff shared in that sorrow. Yet their legacy lived on in the countless people they had touched, in the scientific research they had inspired, and in the simple but profound message they left behind. In a world filled with divisions, friendship knows no boundaries. A few years later, Helen Carter officially retired. Yet she often returned to visit Asher the bobcat, who lived out the rest of his days as a quiet ambassador for his species, helping new generations discover the wonder and unexpected beauty of the wild. And whenever she told the story of the stray calico who had wandered into the wrong enclosure, Helen always ended with the same words. Sometimes the most beautiful things in nature are the very ones that, according to human rules, should never exist at all. Asher and Mira reminded us all that nature does not always follow what is written in textbooks, and that is precisely what makes it magical.